As a licensed medical marijuana user, having just visited the facility, it seems only just that perhaps we should use the medicine. This is a vaporizer, a rather big one, called Venti, by a German company. So you put dry herb in there, you heat it up so you're not smoking, and it gets to temperature 182 degrees it gets to. There we go. You might be wondering, why am I medically licensed? I'm medically licensed for ADHD, which I was diagnosed with years ago. They gave me Ritalin, they gave me dexamphetamine. I didn't have a good relationship or experience with those things. Using cannabis has been part of my life, therefore. And, I guess I'm a case in point, really, for this, isn't it? Here I am, a tax advisor and a accountant, and it'd be taboo or, may upset some of my clients to be like, well, he uses cannabis, he uses drugs. And that's kind of silly because I could go for a drink or, I could be on medication for something and that's okay. But there's something about this thing, this plant, this whole thing that is uncomfortable for us. So here I am having this uncomfortable conversation about who I am and using, medical cannabis on screen and, does that affect me professionally? But I'm here trying to start a conversation. I'm here trying to say, we need to talk about this. We need to talk about it and we need to move forward. And we've got to start having a more open conversation of it and be proud of this amazing business we have in Britain.
We're actually regulating cannabis more harshly than cocaine.
And is it true to say the UK is the largest producer of medical cannabis in the world?
It sounds bizarre, but it is.
You've got this FTSE-listed company, developed medical products, producing the most in the world. I mean, largest producer in the world of medical cannabis. And then you've got this other side of the coin, which we just seem to be 100 years behind the conversation.
And if you go to med school in America, you'll get taught about the endocannabinoid system. If you go to med school in this country, it's not even on syllabus. The NHS are not prescribing it. They did an assessment in 2019 and came to the conclusion that it wasn't good value for money. The only way you're going to die from inhaling cannabis is if you take a ton of it and drop on someone's head.
A break from the norm this week, we took the BWB crew on the road, which is basically me, Dee and a Mustang, where we can't tell you exactly where actually, but we met James Duckenfield, CEO of Glass Pharms, who took us on a tour of their state-of-the-art facility for growing pharmaceutical-grade cannabis. Now, the medical use of cannabis and cannabinoids is still a very small market, largely because of poor public perception and a lack of medical education. Did you know that doctors in the UK aren't even taught about the human body's internal endocannabinoid system, unlike American and European counterparts? And did you know that the UK is the largest producer of medical cannabis in the world and has been for decades? And did you know the ratio of therapeutic to fatal dose in things like paracetamol and aspirin mean that they would never pass clinical trials today? And yet the only way you would die from cannabis, certainly medical cannabis, is if someone accidentally drops a ton of it on your head. Places like Germany and Australia already have over 1 million medical cannabis users each, which shows just how far behind the UK is in this space. And yet, in the UK, problems with overseas supply and overly tight regulations, brace yourself for this fact, cannabis is more tightly regulated than cocaine, believe it or not, means that regular medical users are either being forced back to opioids or to the black market for the medication. Crazy stuff. Please enjoy the chat and let's all wake up. Good morning. How you doing? So we're on a road trip today. We're going to go check out Glass Pharm and meet James Duckenfield, the CEO. Glass Pharm is the largest producer of medical marijuana in bud form in the country. And the UK is the largest producer of medical cannabis, full stop, in the world, and has been for 10 years. But nobody knows that. Nobody wants to talk about cannabis. So we're going to talk about it, and let's go. Nobody seems to be talking about cannabis in medically or recreational purposes in the UK, while the rest of the world seems to be legalising it. So I think it's an important conversation to have. Delighted to be going down there on this beautiful sunny day. We're now arriving-ish Glass Pharm. Haven't quite found it yet. Beautiful rolling English countryside. Somewhere around one of these corners is an enormous shed full of robots and weed, which is a bit crazy. Well, we've just arrived at the Glass Pharm facility, and Dee's just finishing the script. Lovely giant green building here. Appropriate, very appropriate, I feel, given what's inside it. It's also rather green, fluorescent at times. Hey James, great to meet you.
Welcome.
This is James Duckenfield, CEO of Glass Pharms. We've arrived in this majestic building. Where are we, James? What's going on right now?
Well, we're in the atrium. We've just been through the change rooms and got scrubbed up and washed our hands, etc. So above us is the accommodation block, and through these doors we go to the facility. These are recently flowered plants, so they'll have come in for de-leafing. So we want to make sure that we get good airflow through the plants. So in our facility, air goes vertically, not horizontally. So if you go to most facilities, you've got great big fans blowing air across the plants. In our facility, the air goes up through the container, through these chimneys, and through the plants to disturb.
More efficient again.
Much more efficient, and it disturbs all of the trapped air within the plant canopy.
Make sure they're getting heat in the circulation.
And critically, that they don't get detritus or peri-mildew. So it's really an antifungal. Yes, it's antifungal precautions. And so it's about week 6 when the terpenes really kick in, and the volatile sulfur compounds kick in. That funky smell is not terpenes, it's volatile sulfur compounds. And they start expressing about week 6 of flower. We keep mother plants to take cuttings from. They all derive from the same tissue culture. So we never have any seeds in our facility. That we always run from tissue culture. So the plants have come originally from a test tube. We create clones from those tissue cultures, and then we run mother plants, which we take regular cuttings from to run batches. This is a deceptively skillful job. This is probably one of the most important steps horticulturally, where we're taking the cuttings in a very precise way. We're putting them in these small rockable blocks, and then they go from here into our propagation room. And once the roots are developed, they can then be planted out into larger rockable blocks.
But why even though they're growing and they're old, why aren't they producing buds?
That's a very good question. So the plants will only flower when we tell them to flower.
Oh wow!
And we tell them to flower.
Go over with a microphone, a megaphone.
So plants will stay flowerless if we give them enough light. So they have 18 hours of light a day. They will never flower. If we shorten the photo period to 12 hours, then we will trigger flowering.
What's the plant think is going on? Surely loads of light means bud, because buds are about producing their sex organs.
Yes, so when we shorten the photo period to 12 hours, they think, oh, it's time to flower now. It's the end of summer. So
grow, get big.
So they get big during the year, and then what triggers them flowering is the summer equinox. Now the days are getting less. There's now less light.
Produce my baby, spread my seeds.
So that change in photo period triggers the plants to flower, and then they start flowering.
Wow!
And that's why we have these seasons. In the spring season, they'll never flower, and then when we move them into spring, It's a summer
But
rather.
summer's longer days, so they won't flower in summer.
No, but here it's 12 hours.
Oh, 12 hours is summer.
So it's late summer. It's only 12 hours, and that starts from flowering.
Okay.
It's the service corridor. In this area, all the plant movements are automated. So if you see a container plant moving towards you, it's not going to stop for you. They're all.
It's going on right now.
Yeah. So the plants will go through trap doors. They'll go through decontamination tunnels. You can see the decontamination tunnel down the end corridor, and that's how they move around the facility. So this is the beginning of the journey. The cuttings that I showed you earlier get propagated in the room at the end of this space, and then we get empty containers coming through here. They get loaded up with these rock wool blocks, which are made to our specification.
What's it made of? It's sort of just a fibre.
It's very much like loft insulation.
Oh, well. Okay.
And it's completely inert, and the only thing it's doing is providing a structure for the roots to grow through, and something to wick the nutrient mix that we feed the plants.
Why don't we use soil? Because you could be more efficient. You can control more again.
Yeah. So soil harbours all sorts of microbes. So because we're fanatical about trying to control microbes,
Yes.
I don't know how many times we'll talk about that today, but we've got really strict microbial limits to get below. So we're really focused on minimising the amount of bacteria, minimising the amount of yeasts and moulds. So having soil introduces loads of bacteria and yeast and moulds, and this is completely
So
free.
much in soil. You can't even, and if it was clean soil, then it probably wouldn't work.
Exactly. So we sort of avoid that problem, and this really acts as a support for hydroponic growing. So we put these onto the containers, and then the containers go into this automated wetting machine. So all the blocks get evenly dosed with our nutrient mix, and the rock wool blocks are wetted fully. And then over on the other side of the wetting machine, we then put those little blocks that you saw earlier into these round holes, and we are literally putting a square peg in a round hole to get a really tight fit.
What's the other little hole?
That's for a probe.
Okay, to know the temperature and it's all going well.
I mean, so this is for a dripper, but actually we put a different type of probe in the side, which feeds our climate computer. And then the newly planted plants going through the trapdoor inside there and start their journey through an accelerated 12 to 16 week life.
Do you regulate by James?
So growing cannabis is regulated by the Home Office.
Okay, a license to grow cannabis.
So you have to get a Schedule 1 controlled dose license for cultivation of cannabis.
Medical cannabis in this case, which are hard to get, I imagine.
They are very hard to get.
Yeah, okay. And then you're not under food regulation because you're producing a drug from a farmer. You don't have the food.
So we're producing a raw material, which then goes to a specials manufacturer. The specials manufacturer turns it into medicine. So the specials manufacturer is then regulated by both the Home Office and the medicine.
So a lot of what you produce is not output as flower, as bud. Is it?
We're not outputting medicine, we're outputting a raw material.
And then some people turn it into medicine. And that's why Britain is this largest manufacturer of medical marijuana, because of GE.
That's right. So GW. So GW grows large quantities of cannabis for licensed medicine. And then we were the first to get a commercial license to grow for unlicensed medicine.
Unlicensed? Is it all medicine licensed? No.
So licensed medicine is medicines that are approved for a particular ailment and they've got marketing authorization from the MHRA. Unlicensed medicines are ones which the physician is taking the risk personally prescribing.
Right.
So all the cannabis-based products for medicinal use in humans are prescribed by specialist doctors. You can't be prescribed it by a GP.
Yeah. Okay.
It has to be a specialist doctor, and they are personally taking the risk on prescribing a licensed medicine.
Wow. It's like magic. Wow. So this is summer.
So this is summer. So the plants did most are growing in this climate. So now we reduce the amount of hours of lighting to 12. It's a different spectrum of light and higher intensity. But even though we need higher intensity now that we're in flowering, we've still got our artificial lights on because we're getting enough light from the sun.
Wow. That's a lot of water.
Yes, that's why it's important that we recycle water. So these plants are now getting water. These plants will have only just come into this area. So they haven't started flowering yet, whereas these guys have been longer, and the third row even longer. So as they spend more time in here, that flowering gets triggered, and the flowers get larger. And once they've stopped growing vertically, then it's time to move them into the final stage of their life.
It's seems very organised now, but I would have loved to have seen it in the first 3-6 months of setting up. There were a few problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really sophisticated setup, and as you get more and more sophisticated, there's more things that can potentially go wrong. So early doors, we had things like container wrecks. So that, like a car crash, we did have a couple of collisions.
What, into people or into each other?
No, into each other, and because there's so much power behind the robots that move these things around, it completely mangled the.
Wow!
So you end up with these twisted aluminium
plants coming out.
Thankfully, before we were running,
we were just testing
plants. Yeah. So thankfully, yeah.
We were just discussing how, like, we can see them here, that you've got these sort of lines that show the height. And they keep the plants stood up. They also show the stages of growth. And you mentioned that while we've got all this technology, the kind of rule of thumb, the gut instinct's really important.
Sure. So the best way to have technology is to integrate it with the human element of understanding. And every cultivar is different anyway. But we use sort of rules of thumb, such as you can see very clearly on these plants here, that we've de-leafed to the height of the netting.
When you mean de-leaf?
So we've removed the lower canopy of the plant.
Oh yeah, you've taken them away.
All the buds, all the leaves at that point, because we know that within the band of the twig, they will get enough light to swell
the ones at the bottom won't.
Swell the buds, and they wouldn't have done so. And equally, those leaves at the lower end won't be adding to the sugar requirement of the plant. What they'll be doing is actually almost becoming a negative, and they become a detraction.
Just draining effectively.
So what we're taking is understanding of cannabis growing, but putting a technical edge to it, and to understand exactly why things happen.
This is the end of the process. So mature plants will come through the trapdoor over there, and they'll get harvested here. And then we will de-leaf the plant, separate the flowers, and then the flowers will go in through the airlock into the clean room.
That's the thing.
Okay.
And then the packing. No, you then send it out.
Yeah, so we'll then dry and prepare the raw material, and then that gets shipped to a specialist manufacturer to turn into medicine. Okay. So we're about to go into the controlled drug room to have a look at some sample products.
Nice meeting you. And you. With the gloves.
Okay, so you can now take gloves off because we're going to handle the product. You can touch it. You can't do that with a pair of gloves on. Equally, this product is going to be destroyed after anyway. So whereas if you touch the plant, it's a live plant.
I'm trying to not make loads of stupid jokes at this point. It's like, are you sure?
It's difficult.
I'm sure you could come up with more creative ways.
Yeah. So we're looking at a particular strain here. Then it's all the same. Is this all the same thing? Is it?
No, we've got a variety of different cultivars that we offer at the moment. So we've got here. We have this is the Triangle Kush. We have Tangerine Boost, Gelato, Mac, and blackberry sour.
And you're described as a curer, is that right? Is that your job?
My title is production supervisor, but mainly dealing with the drying and curing process.
And that's curing, it's drying, effectively.
No,
I didn't see any drying here, though. Is that
That's
just
all in the clean room.
the clean room's where it dries?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And we've developed a proprietary drying process, which is,
Of course,
secret squirrel.
Yeah.
So that'll be a subject of a future patent application.
Very interesting.
Yeah, we had the option of going old school drying and hanging it up like an 18th century tobacco warehouse.
Yeah.
Or going for freeze drying where it completely desiccates the product and you
Because you get crystals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we didn't want either.
You've got Dyson with a hair dryer.
So we have invented our own process which we can dial to achieve a particular active water content. So active water is a measure, it's a ratio between a sample's water vapor pressure versus pure water. If the sample has got more than 0.62, it's at risk of getting mould. So we set our target at 0.6 to be on the safe side.
Because it's about mould to you rather than about being dry enough, because it's either going to be incorporated into pharmaceutical, it's going to be vaped, which is going to put heat on it anyway, so you don't have to worry about tobacco curing.
So it can't have more than 12% water from a pharmacopoeia perspective. But from our perspective, looking at active water is a much better way of determining the moisture content with regard to microbes and in terms of pliability of the product.
Here we go. Okay, sealed.
So these are samples of our raw material. They're
Wow!
Not meant to
Look at that. And this is.
That's the blackberry sour.
Yeah, I was about to say, is it blackberry?
So do you remember the CBG flower that we were discussing earlier? This is it when it's finished.
And it's got this purple in it.
Yeah.
What do you look for anything when you're looking at this? Is this a grinder or something? What is this?
The grinder, so we do this, we do a milling test just to check for any foreign matter that we might find, but it's also we can do a demonstration to show how a patient will prepare the medicine before use. So
Okay.
if you like, we can do a quick demonstration.
Yeah. Oh, I don't want to open loads if you're going to destroy it all. I feel guilty. Mind you, you've got a bit of it lying around, I think.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Essentially, this is how a patient will prepare it before loading it into a dry herb vaporizer.
Well, let's pick one that's very different, maybe, just as a comparison. The smell of this is, I'm not an expert on how they describe it, but it's more, or tangerine, more lemony. This is much more lavendy or earthy or something. I don't know, what flavour, what do you describe the smells as?
Yeah, so it has got limonene. That's the dominant terpene.
On this one, yeah. And it's described as lemony because it's kind of lemony.
Yeah, so the tangerine boost actually is an indication of its parentage. It's not literally tangerine, but its parents were tangerine sunshine and boost. So that's why it's called tangerine boost. It's almost like dogs get funny names from their parents, and they get merged when you
and the boost. I mean, effectively, the clue is also the name, but it's stimulating.
Yeah, sometimes it's not entirely reliable, but this is a sativa dominant strain which people use for daytime use.
Yeah, I would say predominantly a lot of people would favour this for use in the daytime, a bit more energising than some cultivars.
ADHD, focus and all of that, yeah. Hello and welcome to Business Without Bullshit. And today we have a special edition filming live on location from Glass Pharms, a facility run by the amazing CEO James Duckenfield. It is the largest producer of medical cannabis flower for cannabis-based products for medical use in humans, which is a big mouthful. Suffice to say, it is a serious facility, which is groundbreaking in its own right. James, a chemist originally by training, spent years in the technology industry in companies like Kodak and Ricoh and Xerox, and has now become a cannabis farmer. James, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Who would have thought it?
Let's just start very simply with, just very briefly, Glass Pharms is what?
So as you say, we're a cultivator of medical cannabis flowers for CBPMs. So that's what was legalized in 2018. So it's an unlicensed medicine. So we produce the raw material. It goes to a specials manufacturer in the UK, and they turn it into medicines which specialist physicians can prescribe for a number of different ailments.
And we bump into the first thing that people aren't really aware of, that medical use of cannabis is approved in the UK, but when you say unlicensed, it needs to be a private doctor almost, is it, or it's a physician?
No, so it can be NHS or private. There's only a handful of NHS prescriptions, sadly, but you have to be a specialist physician to prescribe medical cannabis, and it's typically not reimbursable on the NHS. So most of the patients in the UK are private clinic patients.
And is it true to say the UK is the largest producer of medical cannabis in the world?
Yeah, it sounds bizarre, but it is. And we're the biggest producer for unlicensed medicine, but we're dwarfed by GW Pharmaceuticals, who are now Jazz Pharmaceuticals, who produce much more than we do for licensed versions of cannabis medicine. So they have 2 drugs, Epidiolex and Sativex, most of which get shipped overseas, mainly US, but they produce much more than we do.
And this is a listed, it's on the FTSE, isn't it?
Yeah.
And they've got these huge areas for decades. They've been...
Yeah, they've been growing cannabis in the UK since 1998.
And why do you think there is such a gap between public perception of cannabis, policy, and sort of the reality of it, you know?
Yeah, so I think if you went on the streets and asked 100 people, is cannabis available legally for medical use, I don't know, 90 of them would probably say no. So that there's lack of public perception. Clearly the NHS are not prescribing it. They did an assessment in 2019 and came to the conclusion that it wasn't good value for money. We actually paid for that health economic analysis to be rerun, and we co-funded a study at York University, and it showed actually that the NHS could save £4 billion a year were they to start prescribing cannabis for chronic pain.
Oh, for chronic pain, specifically, because they only use opioids really at the moment.
Yeah, so actually there's NICE don't really recommend any pharmacological interventions for chronic pain, amazingly. So they recommend things like cognitive behavioral therapy and things like that. They say that you could use tricyclic antidepressants if you've got somebody with chronic pain, but then you're treating the consequence of having chronic pain, that you become depressed, rather than actually treating the pain itself. So it's a really bizarre situation. So you've got clinicians having to resort to opioids or pregabalin to treat patients with chronic pain, which is not following the NICE guidelines, and they're often, pregabalin for chronic pain is an off-license use of that drug.
Such a strange, you've got this FTSE listed company, developed medical products, producing the most in the world. I mean, largest producer in the world of medical cannabis. And then you've got this other side of the coin, which we just seem to be 100 years behind the conversation. And also we have a culture of hedonism a little bit underneath it. Britain has always been, drinkers and all these things. So it's like, it's everywhere. I just cannot get my head around it.
I mean, arguably it's a lot safer than alcohol.
Yes.
I mean, if you're young, if you're under 25, if you have a history of drug addiction, if you've got a family history or personal history of psychosis, it's probably not the drug for you.
I feel that's so overamped. I actually have a first cousin, and he has schizophrenia. It runs in that family. It's a rare condition.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's not sort of like, I think the perception is that anybody can develop this psychosis. It's not really.
No, absolutely not. So Yes, well, I mean, there have been studies in deprived parts of London on, does cannabis cause psychosis? But actually, is the psychosis caused by the environment, or is it caused by the cannabis in that environment? What's the cause and what's the effect?
And if you consume anything all day, every day, I mean, if you get up and you're just, pounding weed, you know what I mean? I mean, you drink alcohol all day. I mean, what's it going to do to your brain? You're going to lose sleep. You're going to, and hence you need to bring it into the open and talk about it and say, this is a drug.
Yeah.
It's not a tomato.
Exactly. So if you look at Germany, the straight men of Europe, or you look at Australia, who are culturally very similar to the UK, they started the medical cannabis journey around the same time, and both of them have got around 1 million patients now for medical cannabis.
Germany's legalised it recreationally.
Well, they decriminalised it.
Oh, is that what they've done?
Subtly different.
Same as
but in both countries, you can get it reimbursed through medical insurance. The Australians have got a hybrid sort of NHS setup, but a million patients in Australia when they've got 40% of our population. I mean, whereas we're less than 100,000.
I think too, as a medical user myself, it's like people medicate with alcohol, and people say that's bad, but look, people medicate with a lot of stuff. They medicate with exercise. Look, do I really think that someone having a few glasses a week is the end of the world? I mean, I've grown up with a father doing it. No, he's an extremely put together person. But yes, to relax in the evening, he will have a glass of Pure Red. Not every day. And it's a bit like that, my wife watching me with ADHD as a doctor and being like, I've seen how you use cannabis. You medicate with it. I don't use it when I'm working, but, as a way of sort of dealing with my brain, it's helpful. And I find that conversation, very confusing very quickly, because I think it's sort of wrapped up in what is recreation and what is medical immediately. It's where are those lines? But do you feel you wouldn't be someone, you wouldn't want it to be recreationally legally from a business perspective, or do you care?
Well, I mean, we are definitely in the medical camp. So what we want is actually to see medical cannabis more available.
Yes.
In the UK, because we're definitely lagging behind the level of people that are self-prescribing using black market cannabis, which can't be a good thing. It's putting money in the hands of criminals, and who knows what you're buying.
Yeah.
So I think there should be a strong preference to medical cannabis by the regulators, both the Home Office, who are responsible for making sure criminality is managed more accurately. But we're lagging behind, and I think we're lagging behind because of lots of reasons. Partly, the public don't know. I think partly we don't train our doctors on the endocannabinoid systems.
Do they in other countries like Germany and stuff? They learn about the...
Absolutely.
Explain a little bit the endocannabinoid system.
So the endocannabinoid system was actually characterised quite recently, medically speaking. It was in the 1990s.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and there's a number of receptors, but they're allosteric receptors on the nervous system, and they're found all the way. So there's one called CB1, one called CB2. They're all through our body. There's more endocannabinoid receptors in our bodies than there are opioid receptors. So it's quite an important system. And if you go to med school in America, you'll get taught about the endocannabinoid system. If you go to med school in this country, it's not even on syllabus.
Strange repression. And is this suggesting the body is inbuilt, designed to receive opioids or cannabis, or is this something the body uses?
No, I think it's just pure coincidence. So we have our own endocannabinoids. So the endocannabinoids are molecules that we manufacture ourselves to perform the job, and it just so happens that the cannabinoids will trigger the same receptors. Their phytocannabinoids will trigger the same receptors as these endocannabinoids.
It's that sort of, we never know the answer, but did the plant design itself to do this so we grew more of it, or is it just accident?
So the cannabinoids are actually there to protect the plant from insect attacks.
Ah, okay.
So they're part of the plant's
the insects don't like it.
Yes, they're part of the insect defense mechanism. So you'll find the cannabinoids in trichomes, and trichomes basically means hairs. It comes from the Greek for hair. So on the hairs on the cannabis flowers, you'll find these basic anti-insect compounds, and they just happen to trigger our endocannabinoid system. It's a bit something like nicotine. Nicotine is a nerve toxin for insects.
Of course, again.
And so, but that happens to have an effect on humans. But there wasn't an evolutionary process that happened.
I mean, we do regulate heavily in this country, and maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. But, as a business, do you find, this is a very regulated area. Have you found the red tape very heavy? Been anything so absurd you've had to do?
Yeah, I think the reality is that the law change in 2018 actually took place quite quickly. I'm sure for the people who wanted the law changed in 2018, it probably felt like an eternity, but in terms of law changing, it was done really quickly, actually. And I think quicker than the regulator could really adapt to. And in my view, we still have a regulatory environment which isn't well funded enough to enable our industry to operate properly. So that means that making changes to support real genuine demand in medical cannabis takes a really long time, and it's not predictable, and that's terrible for business. It's terrible for investing in businesses. It's terrible for operating businesses.
Well, it could be taken away tomorrow. Really, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So you've got no certainty in terms of what's going on in the future. You've got no certainty in how long it takes to make changes, and businesses naturally change. Over the course of a year, you will get unforeseen changes, and the regulatory system needs to be able to adapt to that foreseeable level of change, which it can't at the moment.
And do you think that's the sort of, that in a way is hold the industry back then? Yeah. It's just the unsure environment. But therefore what you're doing here is quite bold, I guess. What's driving this? The investors driving it, or was it,
Well, I think we saw that there was an opportunity to change the way that medical cannabis is delivered to patients in the UK. And before we were set up, the medical cannabis flower was imported from overseas, and the quality of the flower was very variable. The regularity of supply was variable. So not only was the quality up and down, so was the supply. So things would run out, people would run out of a medication that they found worked for them, and so they then switched to try and find another medicine that would work for them. And if they couldn't find it, they would go back to the black market. And I think there's been a revolving door of people coming into medical cannabis, not getting a good clinical experience or not getting good products experience, and then resorting to going back to the black market. And that's been very disruptive and has stopped the growth of the markets in this country. And I think had we got more proactive regulation, it could have been designed to work and made sure that it worked in a functional way.
So important what you're doing here. You were talking that the police are coming tomorrow, because that's all about this sort of moving it forward as a conversation, isn't it? Yeah.
So we want to have a collaborative relationship with law enforcement and the regulator, so that we have a properly regulated. We don't not want regulation. We want properly managed and functional regulation. So we've got Warwickshire Police coming in tomorrow, as you say. We had 2 police forces in last year to have education days, and for them to understand more about medical cannabis, to learn more about the cultivation cycle of the plants, what differentiates medical cannabis from street cannabis, and it's got to be a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, perceptions are only changed a little bit at the time, aren't they? And you exposing this incredible facility we've been around, and I think also it's probably meeting some patients too, rather than seeing it as this sort of drug, recreational use, But we're still hung up on some of these conversations. People, can't say that alcohol is a drug. I mean, it's mind-blowing. I mean, from a chemist's point of view, you must be like, you're mad, I mean, so, and let's just talk a little bit, is running this place more like farming, pharma, or finance? Which one does it fit under?
Well, thankfully, I have Richard in our team is the MD. Richard Lewis has been a horticulturist for over 35 years, and so there's nothing he doesn't know really about running a large-scale horticultural facility like this. I mean, this is the next generation of facility compared to what he was running in his last facility, which was still a very advanced greenhouse, but it was 8.4 hectares growing
huge
tomatoes. I mean, it was absolutely vast.
What's this? This is a hectare or something?
This is 2.4 hectares.
2.4 hectares, yeah.
So this is a baby greenhouse from his perspective, but with a lot more technology. And then we paired Richard with a cannabis specialist from California initially, so that we could learn the plant. And we've taken the approach of listening to the recreational market growers and looking at how people
there must
grow.
be a lot of knowledge there, yeah.
Absolutely, and looking at how the Canadians grow and the Californians grow and distilling that into a world-class facility here.
Do you think that what's going on here will then go and influence horticulture generally?
Yeah.
You know, it will start changing how people make tomatoes, grow tomatoes.
Yeah, I mean, this is genuinely in my view, the most eco-friendly glass house in Europe, certainly. We're heating the greenhouse with waste heat. We're chilling the greenhouse and doing dehumidification with waste heat. We're using we've got our own electricity generation, which is powered by waste food. It couldn't be more green, eco-friendly and green. So, and I'm very proud of that. And people are getting more interested in looking after the planet, and it may not change consumer habits, but it makes economical sense as well as sense for the planet.
Where next, James? Where when you stare over the brow of the hill, what would you like to see?
So I think we've got a plan to we're producing the raw material now. We will move on to producing active pharmaceutical ingredients, and then we want to move to creating metered dose products to make cannabis medicines look less like a recreational product. And my wife's a GP, and she thought it was peculiar that the medicine is essentially a flower which has to be weighed out by the patient, and she likened it to aspirin. You don't get a tub of aspirin powder and then you ask the patient to weigh out 1,000 milligrams.
Yeah.
It's already made into a tablet which is being weighed out for you, and you're going to get the right dose. So we want to move to things that look more like conventional medicines
To control the dosage. Which means oil vapes, does it? Or
no? So we want to still use the dry flower, but in a pre-weighed format.
Interesting. You pop it in almost. Oh, actually, so you've got to work with technology companies then who make the vapes.
Yeah, and also we want edibles.
Okay. Yeah, the edibles is really, and you can do the mucus edibles and things like this. So you go down all of that. Okay. And how much do you produce at the moment, out of interest?
We are producing over 150 kilograms a month of dry cannabis flower, which is not even 15% of the capacity of this facility.
Okay, really? Look quite busy. Okay, but it can be packed.
Yeah, so
that's what Richard was saying. I want it full.
Yes.
Yeah. But again, back to public perception, back to having a conversation about it. Yes. I mean, I find it utterly bizarre that it's not a regular conversation on the BBC. We need to talk about these things until we get our head around them. We seem very happy to talk about other things. I feel there's some sort of repression, but you've been very eloquent about the regulation is complicated.
Yeah, I mean, it's a legal substance provided it's got a prescription. So if you've got a prescription and you're following the prescriber's guidelines, which is typically that you're using a vaporizer to consume it, and smoking is explicitly illegal within the legislation, and you're not converting it to other forms, then it's legal. You're protected by law. And it's some of the heartwarming stories that we hear via the clinics that use medicines derived from our flower are absolutely heartwarming and life-changing.
Yeah, I bet there's some really beautiful stories. And having watched my sister die of cancer too, and I know in that it can be very useful in those instances. I think whenever you get a medicine that can be safe, and does have an effect, to restrict it is sort of crazy. I mean,
We're actually regulating cannabis more harshly than cocaine.
When I was thinking of when people say, "Oh, but it's a recreation," I was like, "What do you think heroin and opioids are, and diamorphine, and what do you think Novocaine is? It's cocaine. Is that true that we regulate? What Novocaine is easier to produce?
Cannabis is the most strictly regulated,
And yet the safest. I mean, you cannot kill yourself or whatever it's supposed to be unless you got sort of 100 kilos fell on you or something."
Yeah, I went to a medical conference and there was a pain specialist, and he said, the only way you're going to die from inhaling cannabis is if you take a ton of it and drop it on someone's head.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. Yeah, you can kill yourself with cocaine in an hour or two.
And actually, paracetamol
really dangerous.
and aspirin are much more dangerous because the ratio of therapeutic dose to lethal dose would not be allowed if those drugs went to medical trials nowadays.
I noticed on the products that it writes irradiated or non-irradiated, as if this is an important point. What does this mean?
Yeah, so we live in a territory where the microbial standards are very, very tough. So if you were to buy medical cannabis in Canada, the microbial levels can be much higher than...
Meaning little things living on it?
Yeah, so there's two counts. There's one count called total aerobic microbial count, which is the bacteria essentially. And the other one is TYMC, total yeast and molds count. And so that's molds, some of which can be pathogenic, like Aspergillus and harmless yeasts. But these two things have got very stringent levels. So if you are growing in an environment that isn't clean, or where the mold isn't controlled as fanatically as it's controlled in our environment, then you have to irradiate the cannabis to kill the bacteria and yeast.
Radiate mean UV light or something, does it?
No, so it can be gamma irradiated, or it can be beta irradiated. But these are different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum that are basically nuking the DNA in the microbes to make sure they're no longer viable. But it does give a false sense of security somewhat, because if the product was moldy and failed the mold test, when you irradiate it, that mold is still there. So the mold is killed, so it ceases to be pathogenic, so it won't cause aspergillosis, for example.
Yeah, growing in your lungs.
But the mold is still there. So if you have asthma and you're sensitive to mold particles, it will still be allergenic.
Right, because it will pick up on the shape. The immune system will
react.
Yeah,
so it's just your immune system is reacting to the particles. So I think irradiation often gives a false sense of security. It's there to kill things that are there, whereas if it's non-irradiated, it was never there in the first place, and it's a much more difficult thing to achieve.
Why isn't everyone else growing it like that? I would have thought Canada's on this stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, but the microbial levels are much higher over there, and what people are doing is they're taking recreational cannabis, processing it through a GMP facility, irradiating it to achieve the microbial standards, and then shipping it here to as medical cannabis. Whereas we don't have that opportunity.
It's this constant irony. You're doing things as in a world-class standard in an industry that's the biggest in the world, that nobody knows about, that can't get its head around legalizing it, that you can't talk about in a business. Nobody can mention it. Maybe it'll slowly happen as there's more and more people around who are medically licensed, but it's sort of, we are such a strange group of people at times. I think you've explained it brilliantly. I guess the question for us all is Britain ready for an honest conversation about cannabis? But you're trying to have one,
Anytime.
Thank you, James.
So what are my thoughts about Glass Pharms after visiting? I think it's an amazing state-of-the-art facility in this beautiful countryside that is providing amazing quality products to help people with all kinds of medical issues. And yet I feel this real discomfort with talking about it, with vaping right now, even though I'm medically licensed to vape. It just seems to be that it's a bit taboo for us. And it's amazing how much that social conditioning perseveres, that we still struggle to recognize alcohol as a drug. You know, I thought it was so telling when James was explaining it's the most regulated drug, more regulated than cocaine. It's amazing the impact that the propaganda from the 1930s is still happening today. And we should be really proud of that amazing piece of British industry, amazing piece of British business, frankly, and incredibly proud of our industry. And, you know, get comfort with those who have got doctors prescribing them medical marijuana for different purposes. I just hope it changes. I really do. So I guess I'm very pro medical cannabis and hoping I won't be judged for it.